he works at Palmer Station, and they study this single fly that lives in Antarctica that's only found around Palmer Station. And Palmer Station's also, the ocean's way more accessible, so if you're, if you want to study, sea life like seals or certain kinds of fish, that's a good place to go. And you have lots of access to vessels there too if you want to go out to study sea life. And then the South Pole is obviously the station in the middle of at the South Pole, and there's not a lot of biological research that goes on there because it's kind of it's just basically like a big frozen wasteland. But there's a lot of studies there for astronomy. And then McMurdo Station, where I work, which is shown here. So this is Palmer Station, McMurdo at the South Pole, and McMurdo Station is the largest and most highly used station by U.S. participants. So it's about, in the summertime it gets up to about 1,200 people, and about 300 to 400 of those will be scientists, and the rest are all non-science support staff, basically supporting science. And so McMurdo provides access for people that study things on the sea ice. So there's a lot of marine life under the sea ice. It's really diverse and rich there. So there's a lot of groups that work on the sea ice. Penguin colonies, so there's researchers that work on those. Seals, most of the fish biologists. And then McMurdo is also a jumping off point for groups like our group that work in the deep field. And so where we work is we basically use McMurdo Station to get ready to do our science in our field sites. And our field sites are located out in these valleys within the Transantarctic Mountains.
So one fly, what does it eat?
I could not tell you. I probably vegetarian. I don't know.
How does the food chain work in Antarctica?
Well, like the marine food chain is really diverse and complex, right? And it's just like how you would imagine like a marine food chain.
Yeah.
It just depends on the environment. They're all really different. Where I work, I work in lakes that are all microbial, so the whole food chain is microbes. That's it. There's nothing else there. There's other places where there's no light, and so the food chain is driven by microbes that actually break down chemicals. So they're called chemotrophs. So yeah, it's really different depending on where you are. But basically, a lot of Antarctica is really harsh, and so the food webs are extremely simple, and basically they don't make enough biomass to support larger life forms.
Are there protists that prey on the bacteria?
Yes. Yeah, that's actually one of the areas my lab studies intensively is the top of the food chain in our lakes, which are protists. They're called protists, like you probably heard of paramecium or amoeba. So those are larger microbes that have eukaryotic cells, and they get their energy from eating other microbes. So those are basically the top of the food chain where we work. So this is focusing in on specifically the field sites that we work. So this is McMurdo Station, and we work, as I said, in the valleys of these Transantarctic Mountains that basically cut through and separate West Antarctica from the eastern part of the continent. And we focus most of our work in one of the valleys called Taylor Valley. And these valleys are pretty special because they're the only ice-free places in Antarctica. So unlike the rest of Antarctica where it's a solid ice sheet, these places are actually polar deserts. And so they get very little precipitation or snow, and they have very high winds that basically keep it extremely dry. And so in these valleys, there's actually no ice at all for the most part. And specifically in the valleys, we work on lakes. So that's another really special thing. So we work on these ice-covered lakes, which there's lakes and there's hundreds of lakes and ponds within the valleys. And the larger lakes, like the ones that we work on, they have a permanent ice cap, which can be anywhere from 3 to 10 meters thick. And then underneath is a liquid water column, so there's liquid water there year-round. So it's the only place on the Antarctic continent where there's actually liquid water for life. So this is one of the few places in Antarctica where year-round, there's basically a habitat for life. And specifically, like I said, it's all microbial, so it's a very extreme place to live, and the only thing in there is microorganisms, so that's what we focus on. And then there's lots of lakes, but we focus on, a few in particular in this valley. So these are examples of the ones that we intensively study with a much larger group called Long-Term Ecological Research Group, which I think I have a first slide on. So, Antarctica is really interesting to study for lots of reasons. So it's a habitat for extremophiles, so it's interesting because it's basically at the limit of life there. And these kinds of habitats are also examples of what life might have been like during early Earth. So when Earth formed and life first showed up on the planet was probably a pretty horrible place to live. And so extremophiles are also really interesting to study to look at living examples of what life might have been like back when life began. And then there are analogs for life on other planets. So particularly the dry valleys are used as what life might be like on ice-covered moons like Titan. So there's evidence that there's ice-covered oceans on some of these moons, and they would, the dry valleys and the dry valley lakes are probably the only place in the world that most closely resembles what those environments would look like. So again, looking at life there and how it deals with these extreme environments and the diversity of what's there, and also testing equipment, so testing equipment under harsh conditions, and also testing equipment under conditions where you need to really sample environments pristinely and not contaminate them. So that's all really important stuff. And then I mentioned climate change as well. So the Western Antarctic sheet is really under a lot of influence from climate change, and the Eastern Antarctic continent is kind of protected right now. And it's thought that East Antarctica is actually protected because of the ozone hole. So the ozone hole is actually probably prevented Eastern Antarctica from warming up as much as the Western continent has, because the ozone hole's kind of shifted more over the eastern part of the continent. So the dry valleys are kind of on the edge of the east and west continent, and they're mainly experiencing climate change by small increases in temperature, which are causing more glacial melt every summer. So we're getting more liquid water in our environments. It's one of the main impacts we're seeing.
Do you think that we'll find, sorry, no. Sorry. Do you think that we'll find microbial life on other planets?
I don't know. I mean, I think these environments are very likely to be pretty good examples of what the environment might be like there, but I don't know. I'm undecided.
Okay.
Or maybe the life will be so different we won't recognize it. I don't know, as life. I don't know.
How is the ozone layer keeping it colder?
Cold. Because the ozone actually is a greenhouse gas, and so it actually keeps warmer air in. So with a hole in the ozone, you actually have some heat loss in that part of the continent. But the ozone hole's healing now, so it's a lot smaller than it used to be, which is obviously good and maybe not so good for other reasons. So another great thing about working here is we actually work with a really large group of scientists, and they're part of this big program at the National Science Foundation called the Long-Term Ecological Research Sites. And so there's about, I think, almost 40 of these sites located all over North America, and there's 2 in Antarctica. One of them is the McMurdo Dry Valleys, and the other one's at Palmer Station. And then there's 2 or 3 in the Arctic. And the idea is to compare these ecosystems across all these different sites and have a long-term continuous data set. So for example, in the McMurdo Dry Valleys, they've been continually monitoring like a suite of different measurements for more than 20 years now. So we have this really strong metadata set that we can take advantage of. And it also means you interact with a lot of different researchers who study other things besides the lakes. So, you know, there's glaciologists there's people that focus on the glacial streams, there's soil groups, there's groups that work on, there's a nematode there that lives in the soil, so they're called the worm herders, so that worm herders work on that little nematode. That's a scientist who's working on actually wind-driven distribution of soil and, you know, what kinds of organisms are distributed around the valleys. And this shows you just temperature and precipitation annually over all the LTER sites. And our site is basically, you know, the extreme end member in this group. So it's like it's the coldest and the driest of all of the LTER sites. And I think, yeah, there's the Arctic site there, and there's Palmer Station. So Palmer Station's a lot warmer and a lot wetter than our site. Okay, so how do we get there? So we have to take commercial airlines from Oxford, obviously, and we go to LAX, so we all take our different flights. We get to LAX, and then we take a really long flight to Auckland in New Zealand, and then we also
does not look the way it actually does it? Like on Globe, this is much more of a straight line.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's true. Well, it's a big curve.
It's like real.
Yeah, it's more like. Yeah, so eventually you end up in a city called Christchurch, which is on the southernmost part of New Zealand. And you might have heard of Christchurch because there was a massive earthquake there. That was the epicenter of the earthquake, like it was 2010, right after one of my seasons. Like I was there, and then like right afterwards there was this massive earthquake, and so there was a ton of damage done to the city. And then once you get to Christchurch, you stay there for a couple of days, and there's a few major requirements that you have to complete while you're there. And then the U.S. military flies you on cargo planes from Christchurch down to McMurdo Station. And if you're going to Palmer, so you can really see how close Palmer is, you actually take a vessel for 2 weeks from Chile all the way to Palmer. So that's actually a longer trip. And this is apparently some of the worst waters in the world. So it's, yeah. If you have any seasick, then you're just like drugged up and miserable for 2 weeks.
So does access to Antarctica kind of bottleneck into certain like cities? I know that's the route you take, but are there like a lot of alternate routes, or is it generally just a few?
A lot of different science stations use McMurdo, so they will get to McMurdo and then they'll be transported to their science station. And depending where the stations are, they fly in or they take vessels from different places. So there's actually, for the U.S., there's just those two ways, but other countries there's lots of different ways you can get there. I think a lot of times it's a ship. Yeah, because there's only certain places planes can land there. So one of the reasons McMurdo was chosen to be like the major station is that the sea ice is really accessible there, and we actually land on runways on the sea ice. So and then later in the summer, actually the ice blows out, it breaks up, and then large icebreakers can get access to McMurdo. So it's one of the few stations that kind of has the benefits of being able to land planes there, but then later you can get these giant icebreakers in to bring in major supplies.
What are some of the requirements you have to meet in Christchurch?
I think I have some photos. Oh, so there's actually a little passenger terminal there that you go through, which is like at the commercial airline. So this is one of the main things you have to do is the National Science Foundation lends you ECW gear, which is extreme cold weather gear. And so you go into the passenger terminal, and they basically give you this giant supply of clothing, and you have to try all of it on and check it all, because it's not in Antarctica. So you have to personally bring your own stuff. And the main important thing is this huge coat called Big Red, which it's made of Canadian goose down, and then it's like obviously lined with fur, and that's really what protects you down there. And then there's lots of other like thermal layers that they give you as well. It's kind of minimal, but basically you're not going to die probably. And let's see here. Yeah, so then and then you take a few little like minor training videos, but the majority of the field training happens in Antarctica. And they check your computer to make sure that you don't have viruses on it or porn or something. And put a little sticker on it saying your computer's fine. And then you get on a cargo plane, and it's summertime in New Zealand, but you actually have to show that you're wearing all your gear when you get on, because if the plane crashes in Antarctica and you survive, if you didn't have your gear with you, you die from exposure like within minutes. And that's actually happened, like way in the past, that planes crashed and the people survived and then they died, right? So
do they keep it really cool in there since you're all wearing?
Yeah, the U.S. military doesn't give a crap about you. They're just like, they're taking you there and they don't care. It's a military plane. This is a really nice one. But a lot of times we actually fly on old planes because the C-17s are like being used for wars. So they're busy. So yeah, we get the crappy old cargo planes that are, they're like Hercules, and they are minimal, and the bathroom facilities are shocking. And you sit in jump seats. So these big planes, the big nice ones, actually they can put these seats in, or they can take them out and put cargo in. So here's some cargo. But I've been on this plane, and there's been like an entire full helicopter right across from it, like they're huge. And that's what the C-17 looks like when it lands on the sea ice. So the C-17 is really nice, and it's just kind of chance, but you just don't care. You're so excited to go.
So all of those scientists are going to McMurdo?
Mm-hmm.
And
yes, a few of them, so they all have red coats. They're going to McMurdo, and there's a few other, there's an Italian station, and the New Zealanders, they go to McMurdo to get to their stations, but the vast majority all go to McMurdo. So there's ice flights going constantly all summer, taking people down, hundreds of people down.
And how do you, as a scientist, have the ability to go there? Do you submit a proposal for the research you'd like to do, and then it's reviewed by that council, or?
Yeah, it's a really long process. So there's one of the major funding agencies in the States is called the National Science Foundation. So they have many, many, many programs that support science. And it's basically like non-medical science. So there's the National Institute for Health, which is the other one, and it supports medically based science, and NSF kind of supports non-medical science. And so one of the programs is called Office of Polar Programs, and that's the only place that you can apply if you want to go to Antarctica. And so typically, you write a research grant. So typically you write a research grant for your science, right? You're convincing them that you have a science project that has merit and the plan is good and whatever, and you ask them for money, right? So the U.S. Antarctic program is special because it has two parts. One part is you have to pass on the science, and the other part is you have to pass on the logistics of going to the field. So you have to basically tell what you're doing and look like you know what you're doing. And then they also have to coordinate many, many science groups, and some science groups have much, much higher demand logistically than other science groups. And so the first thing you do is you have to pass on your scientific merit. That's the most important part. And then as part of your grant, they don't give you money. They basically give you funds in kind by supporting what you want to do there and the number of people you want to bring. And that happens our current grant right now, I wrote that in 2009. So it's coordinated years in advance. And if you're lucky, for a 3-year grant, you might get to go down once or twice within that 3-year grant. So it's about $100,000 per person to go for a trip. So most of your grant that you never see that funding is actually going there. And then, I'm the investigator on the grant, and then it's completely my decision who goes. And it's typically my graduate students who have projects. And sometimes I've taken an undergrad before if it works, you know, with their schedule, and, you know, it's someone that's intensively working in our lab already because the spots are really limited. And this year I'm actually taking an outreach position, so the other part of National Science Foundation is disseminating your knowledge to the public in different ways, you know, like through K through 12 or just the general public. And so Antarctica really, really expects you to disseminate your science, you know, because Antarctica is, you know, obviously really exciting to the public, so it's a really good way to reach the public. And so this year we're actually taking an educator spot where a professor from a college is coming with us. She's actually the author of the textbook we use for our class. So, yeah. So that's how that works. So then we arrive in McMurdo Station. This is standing in the town and looking actually out on the runway, and the valleys are over here. So this is like the valleys are in these mountains over here. So that's actually where we have to go eventually. And so we stay in McMurdo Station for about a week, training and getting all our supplies ready, kind of at least a week. This is Ivan the Terabus that drives you like into town off the ice runway, and there's a lot of songs about Ivan the Terabus. Ivan's been there a long time. There's another, there's really crazy, like really crazy vehicles there with tracks and giant tires and really heavy duty stuff.
Can you tell us a story about Ivan?
People are just very attached to Ivan because Ivan takes you to Antarctica and then it takes your friends away from Antarctica, right? So there's a lot of angst with Ivan the Terabus. Particularly if you, like we're a science group that just basically stops off in McMurdo to get ready and then go out to the field, and we stay out in the field. But people that stay in McMurdo for months because they're like support staff, they're a really close group, right? Because it's like a tiny town, and if you're not working, there's like nothing to do except recreation. That's it. Like you have no responsibilities at all. They have a lot of fun, basically.
So what kind of people usually get on the support staff?
I have a slide at the end. So the support staff is employed by a military contractor. So basically, military contractors, it comes up for bid, and they run it all. It actually used to be the military ran it, but now they have a contractor. So they employ, like I said, at the peak, they employ hundreds of people, and they have a massive range of experience, from no expertise, because the town is so large, you need things like people working in the cafeteria. So like in the cafeteria, you might meet somebody who's like a dishwasher and they have like a PhD or something, and they just wanted to go to Antarctica, right? Apparently, the pay is really good, and apparently you don't pay taxes when you're there. So like the pay is good. There's no room and board or anything. They pay for you to get there, and you get to go to Antarctica. So
How do you sign up for this?
I'll show you the website. It's Lockheed Martin right now that does it. You have to be an American citizen, I think, which I'm not, so I can't work for them. But I get to go anyway.
What are you a citizen of then?
I'm Canadian.
Canadian,
So there's like kind of no training at all, but then there's like tons of computer. Like there's a massive need for computer technicians there and computing power. So there's that. Then there's like if something breaks down, like you can't drive to your mechanic. Right? So they have like heavy duty mechanics, carpenters, electricians, and then there's a lot of people who are trained in outdoor sports. Well, like outdoor recreation. So there's like the kind of people that would work at like the Outdoor Pursuit Center here. There's all those people there. So there's all these people that actually, like for example, train you to like not die, like when you're out in the field. And if you go to dangerous places like glaciers or mountain climbing, you have to bring mountaineers with you. So all these people are hired by the contractor.
So the mountaineers you wouldn't bring from outside of Antarctica, you expect to find them there already?
Yeah, they take care of all of it for you. Like basically, you have an extremely detailed plan of what you're gonna do and what you need. Like if I need a mountaineer now, they just gonna get lost, right? Because they plan, you know, like back in April of every year, I put in my plan for exactly what I need. So the main things we need is like field gear and science equipment and helicopters. So you have to request all that, you know, and who's going and who they are and yeah. Yeah, so and then they make sure you have it. Like they basically give you a document and they say, look at this and we guarantee you're gonna have this. It's a huge document, which is boring, I hate reading it, but. Yeah, so this is what the town looks like. So there's dorms, which are like definitely not as nice as this dorm. And there's a big cafeteria, so you don't have to cook or anything. There's some buildings for recreation. This is actually where kind of all the outdoor training goes on. So this is a massive facility here where a lot of the mountaineers and other kinds of outdoor, not recreation, but like, because we're basically working out, all the scientists are working outdoors at different places, right? So, yeah.
Where does the food come from? Like, is it shipped in from like Chile or something, or do you need like space food or?
Yeah, so no, so in town, it's mostly not fresh. So a lot of food would be like frozen or dry, and it would come in on the vessel like the year before. But then, like fresh food comes in from New Zealand on the plane, and that's just kind of variable. And then at certain times of the year, the weather's bad and the planes don't come in, and then there's no freshies forever. But we go out in the field, so we get no fresh food ever. It's just like whatever we get. So one of the things they do for us is there's like you got pictures of, there's a store that you go to, like you don't pay for anything, but you go there and basically get all your field food. So that's like one of the many things we have to do to get ready to go into the field. And then they have state-of-the-art labs. They have a really amazing lab facility where, you know, if you work in a lab, like any kind of lab equipment you can think of is there. And you have to, again, request it all in advance because, you know, they want to make sure that you have the right lab equipment, and it's not like, you know, many groups need one piece and there's no way you can all use it kind of situation. You can use isotopes there, radioisotopes. They have a rad lab. Any kind of basic lab equipment, except a flow cytometer, which I've been trying to get for a long time. Then there's these buildings over here. One of these is food for the field. The other one is all the camp gear, so we need a ton of camp gear, outdoor gear, basically.
So what kind of things do you eat for field food?
Dried and frozen. It's actually pretty good quality, although a lot of times it's expired by several years, and I suspect they get a really good deal on it. Nobody's ever gotten sick, so you have to eat a lot of fat and a lot of sugar. So you consume, like just wearing your gear and standing outside, you will burn calories just standing there doing nothing, and the work's really physical, and it's like really long days.
So like, can you give an example of your favorite kind of field food?
I mean, I eat a lot of Cliff Bars. So they have a ton of protein bars. They have tons and tons of gorp, which is like nut, really rich, you know, granola, but it's mostly nuts and chocolate chips. And you just eat, like nobody really gains weight or loses weight there, you know. And the other thing is, it's cold, so you sort of don't think you're thirsty, but you actually are. You really easily become dehydrated, so you have to hydrate all the time there, and becoming hungry or thirsty and not really noticing or tired, those are all major signs of you're going to be more susceptible to hyperthermia. So it's really important to stay warm, eat, and stay hydrated, and you know, not get too tired.
So how do you bring water along with you, or do you bring water, tea, coffee?
Yeah, we have tea and coffee, but I'll show you how we get our water out in the field, which is the liquid water's in the lake, and first of all, you're not allowed to because they're protected sites. You can't drink out of the lake. And you wouldn't want to because there's some really scary like chemicals in there that are sort of like nitrous oxide, for example, and like DMS and all this stuff. It's not contamination, it's the microbes that have like produced these compounds and gases, and because it's ice covered, they don't escape. So they accumulate to extremely high levels, and yeah, you don't want to drink that water. other images of town. There's tons of, this is another view of town. So there's all kinds of buildings, I don't even know what the heck they are, there's tons up here. That's the cafeteria again that we're building. Like I said, especially if you live in town all the time, you have a lot of time for recreation, so there's lots of musicians there and artists and people that do different kinds of crafts, so there's all kinds of that stuff going on. There's a rec center which has costumes, which are very important there. Dressing up in costumes for any reason is extremely important. And basically, yeah, you can just be a complete goofball there, nobody cares. And then other things like skis, so they have, you can go cross-country skiing, and this is all just for free to borrow from this rec center. This is the hospital. That's bad. Mass casualty equipment, you don't want to see them taking that out. Super tiny, basic hospital which has a single doctor, and so their goal is to have no major emergencies there, and so you actually have to go through a huge physical qualification, not like like whatever boot camp level, but just a really extensive health exam and dental exam, and like no cavities, no diseases of any kind, basically, and yeah. So they just want to make sure you're healthy and you don't have high blood pressure or something like that, or something you don't know about that could be a problem there. So they're because could be an emergency and it could become really serious, and it's also very expensive to emergency fly somebody out of Antarctica for it happens every year, but
so they're not like in Antarctica. Do you have any conditions?
It really varies a lot. I wouldn't say that. It just kind of depends. Sometimes they might ask you to have additional testing, or they might want just to make sure that they're confident that you're going to be okay while you're there. Like there was that doctor that got breast cancer, right, at the South Pole. So they're hoping you don't have cancer, for example. But yeah, I think there's there's people, they're diabetic there, and it's not like you have to be in amazing peak condition. Obviously, I'm not, but yeah, they just really, basic blood work, EKG, make sure your heart's functioning, all that stuff. Eye test for some reason, I don't know why, but and then there's actually rec places to hang out in. This is the Coffeehouse, and there's a couple bars there that are pretty minimal that you can hang out in. This is typical dorm room, so it's really basic. They can get pretty elaborate, so this is somebody that lives there for months. That this can get pretty depressing, if you're living in town for months, and so some of the dorm rooms can get pretty crazy. That's what my room looks like, because we're hard. And then there's things, there's runs, so there's runs happening there, so they organize. There's quite a bit of outdoor recreation there around the town, and then that's what the cafeteria looks like.
Mm-hmm. One of the guys in the picture is wearing shorts when he runs.
Yeah,
totally
he's
fine.
crazy. It's not. You really adapt to the cold temperatures. Yeah, and that's a very sunny day in the middle of the summer. But when you arrive there, it's really cold. You really notice it, and then you really quickly adapt to it. Actually, I've never ever gone outside in shorts or a t-shirt. But
What is the temperature?
it's always below freezing. But it's full sun, it's 24-hour sun, and it's really dry. So below freezing, and also if it's low wind, it feels pretty warm. I'm never in a t-shirt, but I might be in a light coat sometimes if I'm not outside very long.
So is the adaptation physical or more mental as far as?
I don't know, that's a good question. I think it's probably both. Yeah. And most people do fine, and some people mentally don't. They can't take it. They can't take, it's like another planet there, especially if you leave town. And some people it's pretty rare, but because people that are going to Antarctica really want to go, usually, right? But occasionally there's somebody who is completely miserable and is too cold and just mentally can't deal with it, so I think it's both. I mean, when you're in town, it's basically like you can kind of pretend you're not in Antarctica if you want to, right? You know, and just like stay in the buildings, and there's people that do that, I think. You know, they just go there for the money and all their friends are there, so, you know, but, I mean, most people are really, really into the outdoor recreation there, and that's why they're there.
Does the 24-hour sun mess with your sleep schedule at all?
I always thought it would, but it really doesn't. So the dorms are dark, they're, like the windows are all covered, and in the fields, you sleep in tents, but like you're so exhausted, it's not a problem. And you actually need way less sleep there. Like I need a lot of sleep usually, and I mean, I don't, you know, I sleep maybe 5 hours there for weeks, and you don't notice it at all. So that's, you know, whereas if you go, like, if you go to like a northern country and you're there in the winter time, you know, and it's dark all the time, or there's very little daylight, you're tired all the time there, you know, like you always feel kind of tired. So that's physiology for sure. Okay, so getting ready for field work. So here's some of the things we do in town. So I mentioned like we go and we get food. So there's a lady who works full time who helps you put your food together. And as like I said, we eat. They have a lot of stuff. Like you can see there's a bunch of chips there, and we have like mountains of chocolate and cookies, just mountains of it. And then we also have a ton of camping gear because we camp. So I'm checking a sleep kit. So you order these sleep kits that have a like Mount Everest level sleeping bags with liners and everything, and you have to take the sleep kits apart and check them to make sure everything's there because you don't want to get out to the field. Tons of other kind of field equipment. So we use drills. We use gas-powered drills. So we have to get all that stuff. Lots of science equipment, like water sampling devices and things. So this is called a stabilizer. It's kind of like a crampon that you would use on a glacier, except it doesn't have giant spikes on it. It just has like small spikes on it. So you basically wear those permanently when you're walking around on the ice on the lakes. And then there's some field training that you have to do. This is the main one you have to do, which is called Happy Camper School. And they basically send you out onto the ice with a bunch of people who leave you out there, and with supplies, and you have to survive. And there's often condition one storms, or like on the sea ice where there's like zero visibility. Obviously, you learn to set up a tent in Antarctica. You learn how to cook out there, and you learn how to make
igloo.
Yeah, it's called a snow trench. So you actually dig down. And then and then sleep in the trench underneath. They make it really cost prohibitive. And that's all useless because we go out into the desert where there's no ice at all. So this is just like kind of fun, and it's really actually not bad. You know, like you learn what it's like to be out by yourself in Antarctica, basically, right, without somebody taking care of you, I guess.
You do that training every time you return?
No, you have to do it every 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and you learn how to like strap yourself into a helicopter, and you learn important things like identifying hypothermia, and you know, like if you lost somebody in a blizzard, which never happens in the dry valleys ever, you know what did you do, right? If you lost somebody from the glue, things like that. And then we get all our stuff together, and we take it down to where the helicopters are. And then they pack all of our equipment onto helicopters, and we take a helicopter out to the dry valleys. And this is what it looks like. We have a lot of gear, so we often have like these boxes called helo boxes, which is for carrying gear that's okay if it freezes, so things like the sleep kits. This is what one of the lakes looks like from the air, and this is kind of some of the really gorgeous scenery that we fly over. So we fly over the sea ice and then over the mountains, and so the scenery is gorgeous. There's a river. This is the largest river in Antarctica that's frozen solid. It's called the Onyx River. And then we get to these field camps, which are on the shores of our lakes. So the field camps are not inhabited at all, so nobody lives there. They're just basically these primitive camps set up for scientists to use while they're working on the lake. So this is what the shore looks like, and then this is what the lakes look like. And they give us things like vehicles, which we're allowed to drive on the ice. So our sampling sites are actually pretty far from the shore because the lakes are quite large. So, and like to take our gear out would suck, like we had to carry it out. So they give us things like ATVs, which we're allowed to drive on the ice only. So you're not allowed to drive vehicles on the soil. So this is all, the dry valleys are all a special protected area where you're only allowed to go if you have permits to go there. And basically you have to use like the leave no trace policy. And that's also part of your training is you know, emphasizing how protected and pristine these environments are and ways that you can mitigate your impact on them. So this is just different helicopters landing in different places in our camp. So one of the ways to minimize impact is there's helo pads where the helicopters land if possible. That's me hooking the helo box onto the helicopter, so that's pretty fun. That person's called the hooker. And that's pretty sweet.
That just kind of.
That's pretty sweet. Like you stand under a helicopter that's flying over you and like hook the thing. Yeah, you have your protection, and you can't. Yeah, you have a walkie-talkie, which is basically useless. They can land on the lakes. There's somebody actually hooking on, you know, the helo box and it's parked. These are we have large helicopters called 212s. And then we have these little helicopters that remind me of MASH. If you ever saw MASH, because they have little baskets on the side. This is somebody, I'm glad this wasn't me. This is somebody like holding the hook, waiting for the helicopter to fly over, and you can see like the dirt, and it'll be like rocks and gravel and everything like flying around. So that's really hardcore cooking. They also do things like, if you ask for it in advance, they will set these huts up for you, and they will actually put a propane heater in the hut. So you're out working on the lake like all day. You can actually be inside these huts, and the huts have a wooden floor with a hole in them where you can drill, like, and get access to the lake. So those are really nice. Those are called polar havens for obvious reasons. This is what a camp would look like. So 3 of our lakes have these permanent camps, and the other ones have nothing at them, basically. So all the camps are kind of the same. They have a large building, which is literally from the Vietnam War. Like, they're Vietnam era buildings that were like repurposed for Antarctica. So they're pretty funny. They're called Janeways, and they're for eating in and kind of getting out of the cold, and that's all. Well, there's a massive stove in there where we actually melt our water source, so that's one of the main important reasons for those guys. We use tons and tons of fuel, so we have a lot of diesel and for power there, so there's generators there, and then we also have renewable sources, so we have solar power, so there's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of solar energy. We also have wind power, but actually the winds are so high in the dry valleys that they knock out the windmills. They're there or they're not there, depending on the year. And then there's these tiny buildings here, which are our labs. So there's usually 2 or 3 tiny little buildings where they're also heated, so they're really nice, and you can bring lab equipment and put it in there and work in there. So we spend a lot of hours in there. And somebody asked about water, so this is how we get our water. We actually have to go out to the glaciers, and the glaciers are constantly calving, and so we pick up the calved ice off the glacier, and then we have to take that back to the camp and melt it. So there's a lot of like camp chores that keep you really busy, you know, besides science. Like a lot of that is just kind of like surviving there, basically. Yeah, so those are called glacial berries. It's super fun, you know. It's a glacier. They're huge. They're just massive. The lakes are all really different, so they're all ice covered, but depending on the age of the lake and also the amount of like wind-blown sediment that falls on the lake. You get really strange ice. So you can get really, really smooth ice. It's like a ice rink, but then you can get like all kinds of crazy ice formations, which are really amazing to look at, but they make transporting your gear pretty frustrating sometimes and challenging. So that's me pulling some gear through this lake, which you cannot definitely drive a ATV on. Yeah, there's some ATVs, so again, you put lots of gear on them. We have some really large pieces of equipment that you simply can't drag yourself, so we use the ATVs to drag those around. But one of the major accident hazards there is actually crashing ATVs, you know, on that ice. That was the first time I drove an ATV, and I thought if I like accelerated, I could like jump and crash in the ice. I was like, boom. So I was pretty happy I wasn't injured. Thanksgiving in Antarctica is pretty fun. So our group actually hikes. We hike all day from one lake to a neighboring lake, and we meet up with about 20 other scientists at one of the main camps that actually has a permanent manager there, and we have like an amazing Thanksgiving, and then we hike back. So that's pretty great. So what kinds of activities do we actually do in the field? So the first thing we have to do is prepare the ice holes. We do that with these drills called jiffy drills, which are the same kind of drill you use if you went ice fishing, except you know our ice is at least 3 meters thick, so that's 10 feet of ice that we have to drill through. And then once we make a hole through the ice, we actually don't punch through the ice because the air temperature is colder than the water. And so if you punch through the ice, water comes up and freezes your drill into the ice, which is really sucky. So we basically estimate where the bottom of the ice is and drill as close as we can. And then we have these melters that we put in to punch through the ice into the lake water, and also melt out like a bigger diameter so we can fit our equipment down the hole. And like I said, that's the hole in the polar haven in the floor that we can drill through if we're working in one of those. We drill lots of places, so we don't always drill in there. And then we can sample. So we have 2 kinds of activities we do there. One is like real-time measurements. So we have a number of instruments that we can actually put in the lake and measure real-time what's going on. And then we sample a lot of water. We collect a lot of water and basically preserve it to bring back to Miami to do mostly molecular work, so genetic work the rest of the year. And so if we're in one of these nice polar havens, we actually have this nice setup here that we can put a hand winch on and attach our equipment. If we don't have that, then we're like out exposed out on a lake. This is one of the lakes we work on where there's like nothing there. And basically the helicopter just drops you off there in the day. And so that's me getting out of the wind. So we actually like hide in hula boxes to get out of the wind, working on an instrument there. This is what the ice hole looks like. So if you look down in the ice hole, we're lowering an instrument there, and here's a couple of different kinds of instruments that we use that we can measure things like oxygen and salinity concentration, and we can also measure abundance and diversity of algae, photosynthetic organisms in the lakes. And you can see we're really bundled up, so we're not in our shorts, right? It's cold. There's all kinds of other science that goes on in the lakes. So this is one example. This is called a sediment trap. So this group puts this huge apparatus, which is a massive funnel. So I don't know, the funnel's like about this big. And then at the bottom, so the funnel basically collects sediment that's falling through the lake. So they put this at the bottom of the lake and they leave it there for a couple of years. And then down here there's a motor that controls bottles, and basically every couple months the motor will switch the bottles. So they get, basically they can track seasonal sediment deposition in the lake. And then there's groups that actually dive. So this is really extreme.
Oh, wow.
And these guys are really highly trained, and they're very small groups. These guys are from New Zealand, so they have, you can see they have they have way better gear than us. And they have a beautiful logo too, which is a penguin with a fern. So a fern's like their national I don't know, plant, I guess. And this group actually is interested in things at the bottom of the lake, so that's an image of, it's called a microbial mat. So these are microbes that basically live in partnership with each other, and they build up things like, they look like moss, but they're really different. They're based on lots of microbes living together, and the mats are built by these microbes called blue-green algae, but they're not bad. They're not like the bad blue-green algae like in, Lake Erie. They're these mat-forming algae. Yeah, so that's crazy. Like, that guy, as soon as he gets out, he freezes solid. Like, his whole suit is frozen. It's insane.
How do they
It's
deal with
amazing
that?
to be there when they're doing it. Pardon?
How do they deal with that? Do they
I don't know, they're
stick with
really
the
tough. There's the people that work there take a lot of pride in like how hardcore they are, and so our science group in terms of Antarctic terms is pretty wimpy. Like, these guys are really hardcore. Yeah. I don't know. They seem fine. They're frozen solid. It looks horrible to me, and they get their suit off as fast as possible. And you have one diver, and then you have the rest of the team is assisting, basically. And they're really careful. It's amazing.
Are the bacterial mats just more structurally sound biofilms, or how do they compare?
They're not really like, they're different from biofilms. I don't think you would classify them as biofilms. Like, they don't necessarily have that special EPS layer, but they are kind of the same thing where so basically cyanobacteria set up the mat, and then it makes this nice habitat that attracts a lot of other microbes. And for example, something that happens in mats is you'll get these really interesting layers of different organisms. So you have the cyanobacteria on top, so you have this green layer, and then underneath that you'll have a purple layer, and that's bacteria that can live under really low light conditions, but they need no oxygen, so they're anoxygenic phototrophs are called. And then under that it'll be like really anoxic, and there'll be like sulfate reducers living there. And then they attract so then there's a lot of activity there, so the mats are really the only place in the lakes where there's high productivity. And it's because the cyanobacteria basically built this oasis for lots of other microbes.
I think progression is the term I'm thinking of, but is it kind of like where one species sort of primes the environment for the next and
Yeah.
build up?
Yeah.
Succession,
Yeah.
progression.
Yeah, succession.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, like I said, we do all kinds of science back here in Miami, and we're focused on working with mainly photosynthetic microbes or algae. And so, like I said, we have this low temperature facility here where we can grow algae. We have a large collection of algae, and we can, grow them in a variety of different ways. And we're interested in how environmental changes affect their physiology and their genetics. It's mainly what we're interested in. So lots of happy students. So how can you go to Antarctica? Have you guys heard of Ernst Shackleton? If you haven't, you guys should really watch one of the documentaries on his failed expedition to Antarctica. So back in the early 1900s, there was lots of scientists, explorers, racing to get to the South Pole, and be the first country to get there. And so the British Antarctic Survey was there was quite a few different people who were involved, and Shackleton was one of the main explorers. And he had several expeditions there. And one of the really famous ones was this ship, the Endurance. And he's famous, the trip failed miserably. The reason it failed is because they had delays, and they started too late in the season. So once they arrived in Antarctica, they were really there too late, and they decided to go for it anyway. And what happened is their ship so they got there too late in the summer. So when you get there in the summertime, a lot of the sea ice has like broken up, right? So the ships can get close enough to the continent, but they got there too late, so the sea ice was starting to freeze up again, and so it caught their ship, basically. So their ship got moored in the sea ice, and then the sea ice eventually crushed it completely, and so they had to abandon the ship and go out onto the sea ice where, like, it's a total wasteland, there's nothing there. And they managed to rescue, the other amazing thing is all these expeditions had professional photographers, so it was really, really important to document these trips. And so they actually rescued a lot of amazing images, and they rescued a few supplies and their boats, their like lifeboats. And they eventually, on their lifeboats, escaped to an island, which was still pretty remote. And then Shackleton and like 3 other sailors navigated, was apparently like the most amazing feat of navigation ever. They navigated with no equipment one of these ships like across the ocean and made it to this whaling station on the other side of the continent called Elephant Island, where there was a Russian whaling station. And they had to get there actually before the station was shut down for the winters, because they didn't stay year round. And then they landed on Elephant Island and they were on the wrong side.
Oh, no.
So then, like, they're not mountaineers, but they had to, after all that, this is like months and months later, and they all had scurvy, of course. They had to, like, get over the mountains to get to the whaling station.
The rest of the crew, did they just
The rest of the crew had to stay on this horrid island and, like, hunker down in a boat that they had turned upside down and made into a shelter and, like, eat seal blubber, basically. And, like, everybody on the expedition survived, absolutely everybody. Like, he rescued everybody. And actually, once they got to the whaling station, the weather was too bad, they actually couldn't go back and rescue the rest of the sailors for like months. Yeah, so you have to watch one of the documentaries.
Oh my God.
So,
Do you know the names of the documentaries?
yeah, I actually have like several that I can lend you. And there's also an awesome like made-for-TV series that's really that's awesome. It's really good. I have that too. Yeah, he's amazing. So anyways, so people were asking how you get there. So I talked a lot about the Antarctic program, right, which funds science there. So there's hundreds of science groups all over the U.S. And this is, I just pulled this off the web, and this is one of the like newest discoveries there was this group that worked on a different kind of lake they're called subglacial lakes. So there's the U.S. Antarctic program, and then there's actually a program to take students there, but this is like they take high school students and undergraduates, and it's like it's a pretty expensive trip. But it's pretty amazing, and you go with teachers, right? So they take you to Antarctica, and they also have Arctic expeditions too. And as I mentioned, there's hundreds of civilians in Antarctica, so that's through the current contractor, which is Lockheed Martin. So you can like go there and see what opportunities are, available for positions there, and they're continually hiring all the time, basically. And people will work, there's people there that work like long term, like they've been doing it for years. They're basically all like unmarried weirdos. Like, I mean, you cannot maintain like kind of a normal life like if you do that, because you go for, in my opinion, like you basically don't have a home in the States. You like have a storage thing, or your stuff's at your parents, and you basically go to Antarctica every single year for like 6 months, and then you travel too, right? So there's a lot of like pretty bizarre people that are amazing, that have been there for many years, but then there's tons and tons of people that go for, basically, experience, and they go for whatever, 1 season or something. And then there's the, because public outreach is so important, there's massive availability of different kinds of projects, on the web that are constantly being like updated. So there's tons of different projects that you can follow. And this is my lab's website, and we have a blog every year, so we blog over there, so you can like follow what we're doing while we're in the field.
Do you guys get Wi-Fi out there?
So actually in town it's pretty good because there's people that need data streaming, right? And they have like massive amounts of data. And in the field, it's kind of spotty and it's pretty bad. So, you know, it just kind of depends. And I think the receivers are like up on the mountains where there's storms. So the storms come along and like take out the receiver, and then like that's it till somebody gets up there on a helicopter and fixes it. So we typically, like I Skype with 201 every year, so I'll do that this year too. And either, like if it's not working in the field, which is way more fun because I can actually like walk around the camp, you can Skype from town for sure. So yeah, so people, you know, watch Netflix and all that crap. Yeah,
I'm in Antarctica. Oh, no, wait, gotta download latest season.
And downloading music is very big too in town. Forget it in the field.
Do you have any positions in your lab available to undergraduate students?
To go to Antarctica?
Or
Or
just
just
For research.
maybe eventually.
Yeah, we're actually, like I don't advertise it in 201 because there's like 100 students in there, and I don't want to say no to like whatever. But yeah, we only currently have one undergrad, so we sort of cleared out a lot of undergrads. So yeah, so if you're interested, you can talk. Usually I basically kind of take students I know, you know, because I meet a lot through 201. So basically, like if you couldn't like handle 201, then
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, that's a good gate.
Yeah.
So, like, did you take 201? No. Okay, come back next year.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So are all the buildings in McMurdo heated inside?
Yeah. Yes, and dry. Everything is dry. Yeah. Yeah. Put on cream and chapstick constantly, and you know, like you go to sleep and you wake up and your mouth is like, you know, it's whole, it's like a dried out cave or something.
Like, the most mind-boggling part is that it's a desert, but you're like, there's all this snow everywhere. Like,
I think it's the driest place
Yeah.
on earth. It's the most, especially in the dry valleys,
Right.
it's the most extreme in terms of low precipitation on earth. Yeah, it's really crazy.
What are some of the publications you and your lab have come out with published?
So we publish in two areas. So we have publications. So if you're interested, we have reviews too, you know, which is kind of a good place to start if you're interested. But so we publish in on the field side. We basically are mainly they're molecular papers. So we use molecular biology techniques to help us characterize the diversity in the lakes. And then we're also interested in how environmental factors influence the distribution of different microbes. And so, you know, we have a number of different kinds of papers in that. And we also do things like we're interested in not just understanding who's there, but who's active, because microbes can be, I mean, it's a pretty harsh place, right? They might just be like hanging out, but they're actually not very active. They're just like kind of dormant and hoping one day that things might get better, you know? So we also do, so we also do measurements where we actually measure mRNA levels of genes, so that we actually know they're like actively being transcribed, which is evidence that, you know, there's active life, you know, because otherwise you could, if you're measuring genetic material like DNA, it could be like I guess it could be like a dead cell or like a cell that's not very active. So that's one side. And then all of our other publications focus on photosynthesis, and we are kind of, our specialty is an area called photobiology. So one of the things that we're really interested in is actually how these organisms harvest light, so that the apparatus for harvesting the light and whether that's changed under low temperatures. But there's a lot of other extremes like really, really low light. So So that always has a big impact on how efficient they are at getting light. And then of course they deal with, you know, we're interested in circadian rhythms too, because, you know, all of life on Earth, basically, if you look at any kind of life, they respond to day-night. And our organisms have this weird, you know, lifestyle where they live under 24-hour day and then 24-hour dark, right? I actually have a student working on circadian rhythms and whether they're still present in the algae, you know, because maybe they've kind of lost the ability to sense day and night because, you know, they don't need to. And then we're also interested in basically how the organisms take light and convert it into energy. And if, you know, if those processes are different, you know, modified in some way. And then we have publications on how they respond to the environment. Because they're adapted to extreme conditions, but the conditions are really, really stable. And so what we found is that a lot of these algae are very poor at dealing with acute changes in their environment, which is also obviously important, you know, when you're thinking about changes in the climate, you know, and whether these organisms are going to be really sensitive to that. And they seem like their ability to deal with acute short-term changes in their environment is really poor. Like they've lost a lot of mechanisms, kind of, you know, they've lost those in favor of having these extreme mechanisms to deal with, you know, this harsh environment.
What are
So-
some ways, sorry.
Yeah, so all our papers are listed on our website, you know, if you're interested in looking at any.
What are some ways you help prevent contamination of your equipment when you're sampling?
So we, one of the main things we don't want to do is like transfer microbes between the lakes because the lakes all have their own, you know, their own unique microbial community that's like been trapped under the ice for several thousand years. So one of the main things we do is we wash all our equipment in sterile water before we use it, and we're pretty careful about obviously not dropping things in the lake. There's really high expectation of dealing with spills. So there's a whole protocol in place if you spill anything in the environment there. So one of the main things is fuel spills, you know, because we are using fuel all the time. So there's a protocol in place where you have to remove all of the fuel completely and, you know, dispose of it. And then the other thing we do is we have to take all the waste out of the camps. So for example, there's no outhouse, right? There's no plumbing and there's no outhouse. And so we have like a giant urine barrel. So we take all that out and we have, waste barrels. So those gray buckets that you saw, and they're all stacked up, those giant stacks of waste buckets, those aren't for science. And then obviously all garbage, like we sort all our garbage and that all has to go out too. So, and then things like in camp, like we tent, but we have to use historical tent sites. You can't just go like set your tent up anywhere. So you have to use the tent sites that other scientists have been using for many years. And tie stuff down because it's really windy. You don't want to lose anything. When it's just like gone, blows down the valley. There's always a tent that blows away. Usually at least one every season you hear about somebody's tent blowing away.
Watch, they all just end up in the same place.
Yeah, I'm
We're
just gonna,
gonna come in this tent cavern one day and be like, oh, found them.
I had, so last season, one of the seasons recently, I put my tent in a historical site, except I didn't notice that it was in a very nice site. It was really close to the lake, and it also happened to be close to where one of the groups had their helo boxes. And when the helicopter came to pick it up, it shredded my tent.
Oh.
That was sad, and I wasn't in it, so I was pretty happy about that. But yeah, totally shredded my tent. That was pretty embarrassing. And it was a mess.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
And Coffeehouse, you just